Who are the Samaritans? It's not a simple question to answer, but we're going to delve into the scriptures and a bit of history and see if we can come to a fairly firm conclusion. Going back historically into the two kingdoms that divided from the nation of Israel, that is, Israel as the northern kingdom and Judah as the southern kingdom, we find that in Isaiah chapter 7, verse 9, it says that the head of Ephraim is Samaria, as Samaria became the capital of the northern kingdom. Now, it wasn't always that this was going to be the case. In fact, what we find is following the Assyrian exile, things changed dramatically. So looking in 2 Kings chapter 17, verses 23 and 24, we find, "So Israel was carried away into exile from their own land to Assyria until this day. The king of Assyria brought men from Babylon and from Cutha and from Ava and from Hamath and from Sepharvaim and settled them in the cities of Samaria in place of the sons of Israel. So they possessed Samaria and lived in its cities." And so there was a dramatic change in circumstances. The Israelites went into exile into Assyria, and these foreign nations were brought in. Now, it isn't the case that the land had been completely divested of all Israelites. There were still some who lived there, and we read about this in 2 Chronicles chapter 30, verse 18, where Hezekiah in this chapter had invited people from the northern kingdom to come down and join with people of the southern kingdom after the Assyrian exile to partake of the Sabbath. And so in 2 Chronicles 30:18, we find, "For a multitude of the people, even many from Ephraim and Manasseh and Issachar and Zebulun, had not purified themselves, yet they ate the Passover otherwise than prescribed." So they'd come down and they had not purified themselves properly. And so Hezekiah prays for them and God forgives them, but they are there partaking of the Passover. And so we know we have people of the northern kingdom, remnants that remained there, and yet this large Gentile population had moved in. So the Samaritans became a mixed population. Over time, they became their own people because they had integrated and mixed Israelites and foreigners to now produce a population that was no longer considered Israelites. And how do we know they were no longer considered Israelites? Well, there are a few ways we know. Two of those come from Jesus himself. In the book of Matthew, chapter 10, verse 5 and 6, he distinguishes Israel from the Samaritans. It says, "These 12 Jesus sent out after instructing them, 'Do not go in the way of the Gentiles, and do not enter any city of the Samaritans, but rather go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel.'" So Jesus here distinguishes the Samaritans from the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And this would have fit in well with what we know of the time. But not only this, in Luke chapter 17, verses 16 through 18, Jesus uses a very specific term to describe Samaritans. It says, "And he fell on his face at his feet, giving thanks to him, and he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus answered and said, Were there not 10 cleansed? But the 9, where are they? Was no one found who returned to give glory to God except this foreigner?" And that's the key. Jesus did not identify this Samaritan as an Israelite. He identified him as a foreigner using the Greek term allogenes. And this term allogenes is only found one time in all the New Testament, but was a fairly common term both before and during Jesus' day. We find it as an example in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament that predated Jesus, in Obadiah chapter 1, verse 11, where it says, "On the day that you stood aloof, on the day that strangers carried off his wealth and foreigners entered his gate and cast lots for Jerusalem, you too were as one of them." Also in Isaiah chapter 60, verse 10, foreigners will build up your walls. In the Septuagint, that is alogenes. And so Jesus uses a term that would describe non-Israelites because they were not considered to be Israelites. Again, they had mixed a Gentile population with a small Israelite remnant, and as a result, they had produced a new people that were no longer considered Israelites. But we do have to address the issue of the Samaritan woman at the well, because she makes an identification in John chapter 4 that some take to suggest that she was herself an Israelite. In John 4:20, she says, "Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and you people say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship." And so she takes our fathers as to be a shared lineage with Jesus as an Israelite. Well, Josephus gives us insight into the history around this, and in his writings from the 1st century AD, that is the same time as the apostles were alive, in his book, The Antiquities of the Jews, chapter 9, verses 290 and 291, he speaks about this, and he starts back at the events described in 2 Kings chapter 17. And he goes on and he says, "And indeed, they, that is, the Samaritans, continue to make use of the very same custom to this very time. And they are called in the Hebrew tongue Cuthians, and in the Greek tongue Samaritans. And when they see the Jews in prosperity, they pretend that they are changed and allied to them and call them kinsmen, as though they were derived from Joseph, and had but that means an original alliance with them." So here they seem to suggest that they take a position that they are actually from Joseph themselves, but Josephus rejects this. Additionally, in Antiquities 11:341, Josephus says, "For such is the disposition of the Samaritans, as we have already elsewhere declared, that when Jews are in adversity, they deny that they are of kin to them, and then they confess the truth. But when they perceive that good fortune has befallen them, they immediately pretend to have communion with them, saying that they belong to them and derive their genealogy from the posterity of Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh." So according to Josephus, they basically fake it. They claim that they're from Israel, even though they're not. They are in fact a mixed race people of some Israelites and foreigners that have produced a new people that were no longer considered to be Israelites.